Hey, welcome back for chapter 7 of my Stroke of Insight. Okay, just so you know, we are 66 pages into this book. All right. So, congratulations. And the reason why I'm like reading all these books is because I won't finish them on my own. And I have so many books that I want to read. So, this is how we're doing it together. Okay. All right. Chapter 7, Bare to the Bone. Upon my arrival at the Massachusetts General Hospital emergency ward, I landed in the center of an emergency spin. An energy spin that I could only describe as a bustling beehive. My limp body felt heavy and terribly weak. It was drained of all the energy like a balloon that had been slowly and thoroughly deflated. Medical personnel swarmed about my gurney. The sharp lights and intense sounds beat upon my brain like a mob, demanding more attention than I could possibly muster to appease them. Answer this, squeeze that, sign here. They demanded of my semi consciousness, and I thought, how absurd. Can't you see I've got a problem here? What's the matter with you people? Slow down. I can't understand you. Be patient. Hold still. That hurts. What is this chaos? The more tenacity they tried to draw me out, the greater my ache was to reach inside for my personal source of sustenance. I felt besieged by their touching, probing, and piercing, like a slug sprinkled with salt. I writhed in response. I wanted to scream, leave me alone, but my voice had fallen silent. They couldn't hear me because they couldn't read my mind. I passed out like a wounded animal, desperate to escape their manipulations. I just want to tell you real quick, I want to interrupt here because as a child, I had to go to the doctors a lot, a lot. I had precocious puberty, so I had like to be seen by doctors all the time. In the clinical setting, it's cold, uncomfortable, and then there's always like adults touching you and stuff like that. And what I want to tell you is that she is speaking from her like inner child right now when she's telling you what's going on in her mind. And I want you, as an adult, um, you can have sympathy with yourself for this, or if you have children, have a little sympathy slash empathy for them too. Please have doctors who take the time to explain what they're doing and why they're doing it, or prepare your children for what might be going on, because inside they might be like, "Ugh, don't touch me," and you should give the child a right to say no to the doctors, okay, until they feel okay and they understand what's actually going on, because you can set trauma in, um, or this sort of like avoidance to the body in the mind of a child, because if they don't like what's going on in a situation, they will like shut themselves off to it because they know they have to go through it. And so it creates dissociations with the body and mind. The only reason why I'm saying this is because it's what I've learned and experienced in this life. So I just want you to understand that she is like, her inner mind she's telling the story of what's going on in her inner mind, okay, but she can't say it out loud, nor could she like really do anything about it because that's procedural, right? Okay. So let's see if I can find where I was at. Leave me alone. Okay. They couldn't hear me because they couldn't read my mind, okay? That's exactly why. I passed out like a wounded animal, desperate to escape their manipulations. I have felt that so many times but haven't been able to pass out. When I first awoke later that afternoon, I was shocked to discover that I was still alive. Heartfelt thanks to the medical professionals who stabilized my body and gave me another chance at life, even though no one had any idea what or how much I would ever recover. My body was draped in the customary hospital gown, and I was resting in a private cubicle. The bed was partially raised with my aching head slightly elevated on a pillow, right? And that's to keep your like blood flow down towards your heart rather than putting the head down below the heart, because then blood would rush to the head. And they do not want that right now, especially in her condition. Um, okay. Devoid of my usual well of energy, my body sank deep into the bed like a lump of heavy metal that I couldn't begin to budge. And that is kind of how you feel in hypnosis too. That's a good thing. You welcome that feeling. I could not determine how my body was positioned, where it began and where it ended. Without the traditional sense of my physical boundaries, I felt that I was at one with the vastness of the universe. My head pulsed with a tormenting pain that pounded like thunder while a white lightning storm raged theatrically upon the inside of my eyelids. Every little shift in position that I tried to make required more energy than my reserves held. Simply inhaling hurt my ribs, and the light that flooded in through my eyes burned my brain like fire. Not able to speak, I begged for the lights to be dimmed by burying my face into a sheet. I couldn't hear anything beyond the pounding rhythm of my heart, which pulsed so loudly that my bones vibrated with aches and my muscles twitched with anguish. My keen scientific mind was no longer available to record, relate, detail, and categorize information about the surrounding external three-dimensional space. I wanted to wail like a colicky newborn that had been suddenly plunged into a realm of chaotic stimulation. With my mind stripped of its ability to recall the memories and detail of my previous life, it was clear to me that I was now like an infant born into an adult woman's body. And oh yes, the brain wasn't working. Here in this emergency cubby, I could sense over my left shoulder the presence of two familiar associates as they peered at a CT scan mounted on a wall light box. The picture on display contained serial sections of my brain, which means like multiple serial killer, right? Serial sections of my brain, and although I could not decipher the words my colleagues softly shared, their body language communicated the gravity of the situation. It didn't take someone with a PhD in neuroanatomy to figure out that the huge white hole in the middle of the brain scan didn't belong there. My left hemisphere was swimming in a pool of blood, and my entire brain was swollen in response to trauma. In silent prayer, I reflected, I am not supposed to be here anymore. I let go. My energy shifted, and the essence of my being escaped. This is not right. I don't belong here anymore. Great Spirit, I mused. I am now at one with the universe. I have blended into the eternal flow, and I am beyond returning to this plane of life. Yet I remain tethered here. The fragile mind of this organic container was shut down and is no longer amenable for intelligent occupancy. I don't belong here anymore. Unencumbered by the emotional connection to anyone or anything outside of myself, my spirit was free to catch a wave in the river of blissful flow. Let me out, I hollered within my mind. I let go, I let go. I wanted to escape this vessel of physical form, which radiated chaos and pain. In those brief moments, I felt tremendous despair that I had survived. My body felt cold, weighty, and ached with pain. The signals between my brain and body were so defective that I couldn't recognize my physical form. I felt as if I was an electrical being, an apparition of energy smoldering around an organic lump. I had become a pile of waste, leftovers, but I still retained a consciousness that was different from the one I had known before. However, because my left hemisphere had been packed with details of how to make sense of the external world, these details had been organized and ingrained in neuronal circuits in my brain. Here, in the absence of that circuitry, I felt inanimate and awkward. My consciousness had shifted. I was still in here. I was still me, but without the richness of the emotional and cognitive connections my life had known. So, was I really still me? How could I still be Dr. Jill Bolte Taylor when I no longer shared her life experiences, thoughts, and emotional attachments? I remember the first day of the stroke with terrific bittersweetness. In the absence of the normal functioning of my left orientation association area, my perception of my physical boundaries was no longer limited to where my skin met air. I felt like a genie liberated from its bottle. The energy of my spirit seemed to flow like a great whale gliding through a sea of silent euphoria, finer than the finest of pleasures we can experience as physical beings. This absence of physical boundary was one of glorious bliss. As my consciousness dwelled in a flow of sweet tranquility, it was obvious to me that I would never be able to squeeze the enormousness of my spirit back inside this tiny cellular matrix. My escape into bliss was a magnificent alternative to the daunting sense of mourning and devastation I felt every time I was coaxed back into some type of interaction with the percolating world outside of me. I existed in some remote space that seemed to be far away from my normal information processing. And it was clear that the I, whom I had grown up to be, had not survived this neurological catastrophe. I understood that Dr. Jill Bolte Taylor died this morning, and yet, with that said, who was left? Or, with my left hemisphere destroyed, perhaps I should now say, who was right? Without a language center telling me, I am Dr. Jill Bolte Taylor. I am a neuroanatomist. I live at this address and can be reached at this phone number. Felt no obligation to being her anymore. It was a truly bizarre shift in perception but without her emotional circuitry reminding me of her likes and dislikes, or her ego center reminding me about her patterns of critical judgment, I didn't think like her anymore. From a practical perspective, considering the amount of biological damage, beginning being her again wasn't even an option. In my mind, in my new perspective, that Dr. Jill Bolte Taylor died that morning and no longer existed. Now that I didn't know her life, her relationships, successes, and mistakes, I was no longer bound to her decisions or self induced limitations. Although I experienced enormous grief for the death of my left hemisphere consciousness and the woman I had been, I concurrently felt tremendous relief that Dr. Jill Bolte Taylor had grown up with lots of anger and a lifetime of emotional baggage that must have required a lot of energy to sustain. She was passionate about her work and her advocacy. She was intensely committed to living a dynamic life, but despite her likable and perhaps even admirable characteristics in my present form, I had not inherited her fundamental hostility. I had forgotten about my brother and his illness. I had forgotten about my parents and their divorce. I had forgotten about my job and all the things in my life that brought me stress. And with this obliteration of memories, I felt both relief and joy. I had spent a lifetime, 37 years, being enthusiastically committed to doing lots of stuff at a very fast pace. On this special day, I learned the meaning of simply being, right? Human being, not human doing. When I lost my left hemisphere and its language centers, I also lost the clock that would break my moments into consecutive brief instances. Instead of having my moments prematurely stunted, they became open ended, and I felt no rush to do anything. Like walking along the beach or just hanging out in the beauty of nature, I shifted from the doing consciousness of my left brain to the being consciousness of my right brain. I morphed from feeling small and isolated to feeling enormous and expansive. I stopped thinking in language and shifted to taking new pictures of what was going on in the present moment. I was not capable of deliberating about past or future related ideas because those cells were incapacitated. All I could perceive was right here, right now, and it was beautiful. My entire self concept shifted as I no longer perceived myself as single, a solid, an entity with boundaries that separated me from the entities around me. I understood that at the most elementary level, I am fluid. Of course, I am fluid. Everything around us, about us, among us, within us, and between us is made up of atoms and molecules vibrating in space. Although the ego center of our language centers prefers defining ourself as individual and solid, most of us are aware that we are made up of trillions of cells, gallons of water, and ultimately everything about us exists in a constant and dynamic state of activity. My left hemispheres had been trained to perceive myself as solid, separate from others. Now, as a solid separate from others. Now, released from that restrictive circuitry, my right hemisphere relished in its attachment to the eternal flow. I was no longer isolated and alone. My soul was as big as the universe and frolicked with glee in a boundless sea. For many of us, thinking about ourselves as fluid or with souls as big as the universe connected to the energy flow of us, of all that is, slips us out of just beyond our comfort zone. But without the judgment of my left brain saying that I am a solid, my perception of myself returned to this natural state of fluidity. Clearly, we are each trillions upon trillions of particles in soft vibration. We exist as fluid filled sacs in a fluid world where everything exists in motion. Different entities are composed of different densities of molecules, but ultimately, every pixel is made up of electrons, protons, and neutrons performing a delicate dance. Every pixel, including every iota of you and me, and every pixel of space seemingly in between, is atomic matter and energy. My eyes could no longer perceive things as things that were separate from one another. Instead, the energy of everything blended together. My visual processing was no longer normal. I compared this pixelated perspective to Impressionist pointillism paintings. I was consciously alert, and my perception was that I was in the flow. Everything in my visual cortex and my visual world blended together, and with every pixel radiating energy, we all flowed en masse together as one. It was impossible for me to distinguish the physical boundaries between objects because everything radiated with similar energy. It's probably comparable to when people take off their glasses or put eye drops into their eyes. The edges become softer. In this state of mind, or like when you're crying, right? Okay. In this state of mind, I could not perceive three-dimensionally. Nothing stood out as being closer or further away. If there was a person standing in the doorway, I could not distinguish their presence until they moved. It took activity for me to know that I should pay attention, special attention, to any particular patch of molecules. In addition, color did not register to my brain as color. I simply couldn't distinguish it. Prior to this morning, when I had experienced myself as a solid, I had possessed the ability to experience loss, either physical loss via death or injury, or emotional loss via or through heartache. But in the shifted perception, it was impossible for me to perceive either physical or emotional loss because I was not capable of experiencing separation or individuality. Despite my neurological trauma, an unforgettable sense of peace pervaded my entire being, and I felt calm. Although I rejoiced in my perception of connection to all that is, I shuddered at the awareness that I was no longer a normal human being. How on earth would I exist as a member of the human race with this heightened perception that we are, yeah, perception, because I always think it's perspective. All right, that we are each a part of it all, and that the life force energy within each of us contains the power of the universe. How could I fit in with our society walk when I walk the earth with no fear? I was, by anyone's standards, no longer normal. In my own unique way, I had become severely mentally ill. And I must say, there was both freedom and challenge for me in recognizing that our perception of the external world and our relationship to it is a product of our own neurological circuitry. For all those years of my life, I really had been a figment of my own imagination. Man, that's a great way to put it, okay? Because we all are. When the timekeeper in my left hemisphere shut down, the natural temporal cadence of my life slowed to the pace of a snail. As my perception of time shifted, I fell out of sync with the beehive that bustled around me. My consciousness drifted into a time warp, rendering me incapable of communicating or functioning at either the accustomed or acceptable pace of social change. I now existed in a world between worlds. I could no longer relate to people outside of me, and yet my life had not been extinguished. I was not only an oddity to those around me, but on the inside, I was an oddity to myself. I felt so detached from my ability to move my body with any oomph that I truly believed I would never be able to get this collection of cells to perform again. Wasn't it interesting that although I could not walk or talk, understand language or read or write, I even roll my body over, or even roll my body over, I knew that I was okay. The now offline intellectual mind of my left hemisphere no longer inhibited my innate awareness that I was the miraculous power of life. I knew I was different now, but never once did my right mind indicate that I was being less than what I had been before. I was simply a being of light radiating life into the world. Regardless of whether or not I had a body or brain that could connect me to the world of others, I saw myself as a cellular masterpiece. In the absence of my left hemisphere negative judgment, I perceived myself as perfect, whole, and beautiful, just the way I was. You may be wondering how it is that I still remember everything that happened. I remind you that although I was mentally disabled, I was not unconscious. Our consciousness time is created by numerous programs that are running at the same time. Each program adds a new dimension to our ability to perceive things in the three-dimensional world. Although I had lost my left hemisphere consciousness, containing my ego center and ability to see myself as a single and solid entity separate from you, I retained both the consciousness of my right mind and the consciousness of the cells making up my body. Although one set of programs was no longer functioning, the one that reminded me moment by moment of who I was and where I lived, etc., the other parts of me remained alert and continued processing instantaneous information. In the absence of my traditional left hemispheric domination over my right hand, other parts of my brain emerged. Programs that had been inhibited were now free to run, and I was no longer fettered to my previous interpretation of perception. With this shift away from my left hemisphere, consciousness was the character I had been. My right hemisphere character emerged with new insight. To hear others tell the story, however, I was quite a mess that day. I was like a newborn, unable to make sense of the sensory stimulation in the physical space around me. It was obvious that I had perceived incoming stimulation as painful. Sound streaming in through my ears blasted my brain senseless, so that when people spoke, I could not distinguish their voices from the underlying clatter of the environment. From my perspective, everyone clamored in mass and resonated like a discordant pack of restless animals. Inside my head, I felt as though my ears were no longer tightly connected to my brain, and I sensed that important information was seeping out between the cracks. I wanted to communicate, yelling louder. Yelling louder does not help me understand you any better. Don't be afraid of me. Come closer to me. Bring me your gentle spirit. Speak more slowly. Enunciate more clearly. Again, please try again. Slow down. Be kind to me. Be a safe place for me. See that I am a wounded animal, not a stupid animal. I am vulnerable and confused. Whatever my age, whatever my credentials, reach for me. Respect me. I am in here. Come find me. Okay, so like that's all her internal monologue. And that could be a very generalized monologue for how you should treat every single person in this world. Okay. Because there's a part of us within each of us that would like to say those things to people. If you're like speaking a different language than us, or it's new information that you're trying to tell somebody. So like, if somebody comes to you because you're the receptionist of some place, or like wherever you work, whenever somebody comes to you, that's because you are supposed to be this fount of knowledge and the gatekeeper between like them and the thing that they're trying to get done. Okay. Very rarely is it like people are coming to you directly for the thing that you are doing for them. It's more that you are like doing something so that they can get something else done. Right. So like if you have um car work that needs to get done, they're trying to explain something to you, thinking that you are one step closer to the expert because I know that you know things that the expert knows, and you understand how like the person coming to you is sort of like an infant talking to you about this thing that there's like you're the gatekeeper to the adult who actually knows what's going on, even though okay, so you understand I'm talking in metaphors. I'm speaking in metaphors because this is what will allow you to change the world from right where you are, is that I want you to treat everybody as if they are this like inner child who can't say like I'm an inner child and I have no idea what's going on with this thing. They might be responding to you or like coming at you with this like ego because they don't want to seem stupid. Okay, so just understand that when people are approaching you with this ego and this attitude, it's because they've reached a point of where they don't know anything anymore. So they're trying to use this imposing ego in order to like get you to help them, when that's like the worst way for everybody to get help. You need to like be willing to ask for it. Okay. Sidebar. All right. But an important one. Earlier this morning, I never entertained the possibility that I was orchestrating my rescue so that I would live out the rest of my days completely disabled. Yet, at the core of my being, my conscious mind felt so detached from my physical body that I sincerely believed I would never be able to fit the energy of me back inside of this skin, nor ever be able to re engage the intricate networks of my body's cellular and molecular tapestry. I felt suspended between two worlds, caught between two perfectly opposite planes of reality. For me, hell existed inside the pain of this wounded body as it failed miserably in any attempt to interact with the external world, while heaven existed in a consciousness that soared in eternal bliss. And yet, somewhere deep within me, there was a jubilant being, thrilled that I had survived. She is right that hell only exists on this earth, and it is in pain. If you didn't have pain or consequence, you would be in heaven, right? That's why there's the story within the Bible that like there's Adam and Eve, there's like Jesus, which was the embodiment of God, so that pain could be felt, so that heaven and hell could be distinguished, so that you do not have to spend much time in hell here, okay? Because you can choose. Like Jesus supposedly came here to free us from our sins by internalizing like all of the pain of the world of sin, right? He did it. He was like this embodiment of pure love so that he could endure the pain of sin, right? For him, that was love. And for God, that's what love is. It was like to create his own child, which was himself. It's like he was creating his, you know, inner child, but it's his outer child, right? So that's how, as without, so within. I'm just gonna go to my other channel, um, as the crow flies 144, and I am going to have a conversation about it there. Okay, and I'm also going to do a tarot reading where this stuff can converse instead of like doing it all right here. Okay, I love you. Come back for chapter 8. All right. Bye.